Welcome to Finding Hope, The End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Hi, Barry.
Hi, Patricia.
How are you?
Welcome
Good.
back.
Yeah.
Hope you had a good week. And
Good. Welcome back to Finding Hope, The End to Suffering, created by Barry Weinhold. And, based on your many, many years of experience and work and over 60 plus books and working with thousands of people, you decided to bring this to the media.
And we had a good response to the first series with Susan Blue. I forgot to mention that.
Good.
I'm looking forward to a good interview here with Rafa Flores, who's going to tell us about his life and the suffering that he's had to endure and what he's done about that and how he's found ways to move himself to the end of suffering and into much hope and much positive experience. So let's bring Rafa. Hi, Rafa.
Hi, Rafa.
Good to see you.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. And so I mentioned, I think, to you, and I didn't mention to the rest of you, that we have sort of 4 key questions that we start our guests off with. And the first one is, like, what happened to you that caused you suffering in your life? And like, you can go back as early as you want to in telling us about that. And sometimes at the time you didn't know you were suffering, but as you reflected on that later, you saw that, boy, that really had hit me pretty hard, and I had long-term effects from that. So that'd be the kind of stuff I'd want to hear from you about that. And then about the effect it had, maybe short-term and long-term effect that you became aware of eventually. And then the third one is, well, what did you do about that? How did you make sense out of all that? And then finally, about what did you do then to bring yourself to the end of suffering? What kinds of things did you find worked for you as you tried to overcome the long-term effects from some of your early childhood experiences? So that's sort of the framework we're going with in the series of 3 different segments of this interview. So let's start with what happened to you and that you see now caused you suffering in your life.
Well, that's definitely a fun question to pose, because growing up, I didn't think there was anything wrong with my life. It was just a normal life to live and grow up in a large family, be forgotten or left behind at the grocery store.
Say a little bit about your family. How large was it, and what was a little bit about the family?
So there were 8 children. I have 4 older sisters, 2 younger brothers, and a younger sister. So I'm number 5. There was actually a pregnancy between myself and my sister, just older than myself.
Uh-huh.
But so yeah, in a big family, it's not near as organized as one would see on TV or imagine as one on TV. I mean, we're all in it every single day, from early in the morning to late at night, fighting over water and shower and mirror time and bathroom time, and it's just a fun way to grow up. But in my life, I really didn't think there was anything wrong with the way I grew up. There were a few key elements growing up that ended up being problematic, and they stemmed from different pivot points in my life. Essentially, the first major pivot point that I can recall was kind of a fishing trip when my dad and the three boys, that's what they called us, the three boys. My dad had taken us fishing, and my dad wasn't a fisherman and didn't have much experience with it. And it really bothered me that the salesman at the sports store, at the hardware store, was selling my dad equipment that, we didn't need anything more than cane poles at that time and at that age. But he ended up selling him a bait casting reel for us. And a bait casting reel, for anybody who doesn't fish, is a hard reel to master, right? Anyway, that whole thing left me quite uncomfortable. We went fishing. We tried to use these bait casting reels without really knowing how to use them. We got big old bird nests every single time we cast, and we spent the whole trip untangling our reels. We didn't get much fishing done, and it was very frustrating. And Dad was upset with us being frustrated as kids because he wanted to show us a good time, right? And so we put the fishing poles back in the car, and so Dad rolls up the window and he snaps the tips off of all the rods because they were sticking out the window. And I just remember feeling so bad about that. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm not going to be doing stuff like that. I'm going to learn. I'm going to understand before we buy anything like this again. And
how old were you about that time?
Gosh, we were young. I want to say maybe 7, maybe 8.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the oldest boy. So my younger brothers are a year behind me. So I was born in March. My next brother was born July of the following year. And then my next brother was born September of that following year. So that was quite a handful. 3 boys that close in age. And I tell you what, that was an expensive food bill when all 3 of us were teenagers.
Right. Well, tell me how you got along with your mother and your father growing up.
For the most part, my dad was working a lot, and my mom was busy doing her things, and the 3 boys were basically entertaining each other and running around the neighborhood and running outside. My mom had a drain put in the sidewalk or the apron around the house in our backyard, and we would get so dirty during the day that she would just line us all up and then spray us off with the water hose to knock all the dirt off our clothes and mud and everything that we'd gotten into. And then she would throw the clothes right through the window into a sink where she had her washing machine and dryer, and then she had a sink between them. And so she had a window there, and she would put our clothes in there and then march us straight into the bathroom, and all 3 of us would fit in the tub and take our baths. That's how small we were. But yeah, she would just hose us off outside. I mean, it was a fair enough relationship as far as a child is concerned, and growing up that way. It wasn't until around 10, 11, 12 years of age when things got a little more emotionally aware for me, but the dynamics in the house got a little, or I recognized them, or I was able to see them or sense them more at about that age, at about 10.
Mm-hmm. What did you sense?
Oh, the tension between my parents. I mean, it was really obvious. And, one parent asking, putting their feelings onto me anyway. I don't know how they worked with my other siblings, but in me in particular, essentially asking questions, spying questions. Well, what was happening and what happened there and what was this and what was that about? And I'm like, I don't want to be involved in your relationship. What the hell? I'm a kid. And, you don't need to lay this on me, kind of thing. And so that's kind of where I could feel the relationship coming off the rails at that point. But that's the only time I was conscious of it.
Yeah.
Now, who knows? I mean, the relationship could have been falling apart a lot earlier. I don't know.
It often is before kids get aware of it. Sure.
But I think the cognizant recognition of it didn't happen until I was older.
How did all that affect you at the time and later?
Well, at the time, it really affected me. And I've brought this up in group, but it really affected me because I didn't want to be responsible for somebody else's feelings. Because quite frankly, even as the adult I am today, with all the journey I've been through to this point, being responsible for somebody else's feelings is an impossibility.
Yeah.
How can I fix something that's wounded in somebody else? I have no authority there. And so it laid a kind of a foundation where I didn't want to have to be responsible for somebody else's feelings. And the way that ended up in future relationships was kind of a callous way of looking at, well, you did this to me. I didn't do anything to you. You interpreted whatever I said and you took those feelings on for yourself. I didn't cause anything.
Yeah. People are saying like, you made me feel something.
Right.
Yeah.
Or didn't you know that would happen or that you would do that?
Yeah.
So that's how that kind of crept in. And then the other part of my, childhood, of course, my mom's got 8 other kids in the house or 7 other kids in the house, and everything that she's got to do, grocery shopping. I mean, that was like an every other day event, and we would help her push the carts around because we would end up pushing 3 carts worth of stuff because we had, that many people to feed, right? And inevitably, without doing a head count before leaving the parking lot, somebody would be left behind, and usually me. And probably because I was doing something wrong or being bad. Anyway, I would get left behind, and then they would call over the loudspeaker looking for my mom, and eventually they'd either turn around and come back after they got home and unloaded the groceries, like, oh, we're short a kid. Crap. And go back. But it started around that time period, and I remember I walked on to a baseball team that was practicing within earshot of our house. And I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I climbed out of the backyard, let myself out of the backyard and walked, and I came across this little league, Pee Wee League baseball team. And the coach was like, yeah, who are you? I said, well, I just live right here. Can I play with you guys? And of course, it was a league deal, and you were supposed to be there according to where you lived, and there were lines that were drawn. But this guy was all smiles, and he said, hey, why don't you just come and play with me? So playing with this team, I had to do that. And again, how does this paint what's going to happen in the future? I think this lays a lot of foundation where, if I want something done, I'm going to have to do it myself. And is it just neglect? No, it's not intentional. It's just the size of the family at the time, and everybody in big families goes through this. Then we have this whole relationship factor and how that played into my childhood and interrupted my childhood.
Yeah.
And
Say more about that, about what happened with your family and your parents.
Well, ultimately, this ended up with my dad leaving the house.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he walked out on all of us, and so
how did that affect you?
Well, almost seamlessly, I had to step into, or I did step into the role of the man of the house, and my mom leaned into me pretty hard with all of that. And culturally speaking, the firstborn son in a Latino family, Hispanic family, or in our culture anyway, the firstborn son is the one that takes over. That's just how it is.
That was expected.
Yeah, that was expected. And so I was my mom's escort. I was my mom's, person to attend weddings with, and to go to funerals with, and to go out with, and stuff like that. So that's where that happened, and that developed all the way through until I left for college.
Yeah.
Rafa, I have a question. That relationship with your mom, where you were kind of like her surrogate in a way, right? I mean, you were really
definitely her surrogate,
like a husband. How did that, unless I'm moving ahead here too far, how did that affect relationships with women or partners later?
Well, affected them greatly. I mean, relationships just were not anything that I was comfortable with at all. And it was a huge dynamic to overcome and understand what relationship was. And I finally did learn what relationship was when I was much older and able to recognize what true surrender was, what true forgiveness was. And both of those, surrender and forgiveness of myself. And that was a huge turning point later on in life. But the foundations for all of that happened back when I was 14.
Wow. Yeah, that is a long-term kind of issue that at the time it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. I mean, you just absolutely, in that culture, it was just your turn to take over. And yet it had some long-term effects on you, which I think as we move on into the interview, I'd like to hear more about that and how that affected a lot of different things in your life, and how you had to overcome that role that was put on you.
Exactly.
So maybe that's a good place to stop for today, and then move next time when we meet again into more about that and the long-term effects. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about how pride got in your way, because I think that's a big issue for a lot of people, and how you worked through that. So in the next segment, let's talk some more about that.
Yeah, and Barry, I just want to say that I think, what Rafa is talking about has happened to many people.
Absolutely.
When parents separate or divorce, or even if they don't, and one parent, forms this tremendous attachment to one of the children, and it becomes almost like, as we said, a surrogate relationship. It does cause problems for that child later on in life.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's great to hear that example, because I think a lot of people don't want to look at that, right? They don't really, oh, but it was my parent. And so this really opens up the door to looking at that and seeing that, yeah, this is what happens when that happens.
Okay, well, let's sign off for today, and
All right.
we'll talk to you more next week.
Thanks. I'm Patricia Raskin.
I'm Barry Weinhold.
Okay.
See you all next week.
Bye.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope: The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.